Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 293 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Jerome Hardaway.
Hey everybody.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and we have a special guest this week, and that's Nell Shamrell-Harrington.
Hello, greetings from cold and soggy Seattle.
Soggy, huh?
Yep. It's been not snowing. It's not quite cold enough to snow, but there's been a drizzle and constant moisture in the air.
Cool. It snowed here a couple times, but it's all melted off, so I don't know if we're in for a white Christmas or not. I think it's supposed to snow on Christmas Eve, so...
Nice.
Yeah.
We're just getting defrost. That's about it.
Yeah. My wife is panicked about her dad driving up because he has to drive through a pretty nasty canyon. So.
Hey.
Yeah, that's always fun. I also want to just throw in a quick announcement. Early bird tickets ended for DevOps Remote Conf, but since this episode is kind of right up that alley, I thought I would just share. You can still get tickets. The conference is January 18th and 19th, and I just selected all the speakers, and we're getting them up on the website right now. So. All right, well, let's jump in and talk about this. So, packaging Ruby. I think this is actually a new topic for the show. Sometimes we revisit stuff because things change, but I don't think we've really talked about this, so I'm kind of interested to see where we go with it. When you talk about Ruby packaging, what exactly are you thinking about now?
Sure. What I'm thinking about mainly is, so before I worked at Chef, I worked on applications where we would have it hosted on our own servers in our own data center or whatever cloud provider we were using, and people would go to our website and use our product there. When I came to Chef, I started making software that we would make for people to run on their own hardware. Whether that's cloud-based hardware, whether that's on-premises hardware, and I realized that I needed to learn how to package it together. So when I say packaging, I mean making an artifact of some sort that someone can take and run on their own workstation or run on their own hardware. So in Ruby, the most classic example we have, I think, is Ruby Gems, which are little self-contained programs that anyone with Ruby or Ruby Gems can install and run software through there.
Yeah, I think we're all familiar with Ruby Gems and the model there.
Yep.
We are.
And we just had an episode about building a gem, and so if you're wondering about the other end and how you get that artifact or the gem, then go check out that episode.
Absolutely. And what I also find interesting is, this is going to get nerdy, but I recently got back into World of Warcraft, and I remembered how even just 5-6 years ago, I used to line up at midnight when it was time for a new expansion to buy a physical software package with the new game expansion on it. But now I mainly download them. And that brings us into the topic of package managers. Not only how do you create packages, but how do you download them? How do you verify they're from who it says they're from? How do you verify that they're secure? That's a big one. So there's lots of interesting things to sink our teeth into. Yeah,
definitely. One thing that you said that kind of got me going is that I remember my last full-time job. I worked for Public Engines, which was a company that did crimereports.com. I actually worked there with David Brady. And,
cool.
Anyway, we had government data, and so we had all these restrictions on how we could actually access the data and deploy our applications. And so whenever we had to add a new gem to the application, we would actually take it over to the IT guys, sometimes actually take it over on a thumb drive. And they would package it up as an RPM and deploy it to the server. And I always thought that was interesting because, it's just like, why can't we just put Ruby Gems on there and just gem install or bundle install and just get it that way? But yeah, there are actually reasons for packaging up a full app or packaging up even part of an app or a library or something else just to get it onto a server or some other environment.
Right. At Chef, we have several customers who work in air-gapped environments. That means this hardware they have has no outside internet connection because they're running our software on things like nuclear power reactors and defense systems. So we need to be able to put together a package with everything they need to run our software in a way that they can install it on an air-gapped environment.
Oh yes, I've seen that process in real life. It's pretty. It sucks on every level. So I definitely understand the importance of that.
I almost expected you to say that you loved it, Jerome, and I was going to be like, why?
Oh, I mean, I understand the security of being able to do it in every environment, especially in reference to what she's saying with nuke bases, and like last year when we all got in trouble for some stuff accidentally ended up on the wrong plane in the wrong country. But it's a horrible process going through that, physically implementing packages and things of that in a system that's not connected to the web or the cloud. Everything's internal.
Yeah, it's especially fun when you have a Ruby library that accesses a C library that has to be compiled on the machine. Because you get like 3 different levels of this, right? Because you have to make sure that it's all over there. And sometimes it's convenient to get that all in one package, and sometimes it really isn't.
That is very true.
I'm just started. This month is my sabbatical month from Ruby, and I've been focusing on C. And as a person that started in JavaScript and Ruby and never touched C, it has been the most painful month of my life. So let's not mention C for the rest of this.
The language that's
Sorry, Matt.
So how many different packaging systems are there out there?
There are a lot. I mean, the ones I probably use the most are the classic Linux ones, Debian, using that for Ubuntu systems, or RPM/Yum, using that for Red Hat systems. But, I mean, it's not only operating systems. On Mac, we have Homebrew, Mac ports. Windows, we have Chocolatey. But even editors, I've noticed, now have package management systems. Like I use Vim personally, and there's Vundle, which is similar to Bundle, that I can use to handle all the different plugins I use within my Vim editor.
Yeah, Emacs has the same thing. I don't know what it's called, but yeah, I Command X and then package -list -packages, and then you pick the ones you want.
Exactly.
That's the exact same thing, but they just call it Atom. Just Atom install whatever packages.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Atom has them. I mean, if you're getting into those, I mean, Visual Studio Code has them. Sublime Text has them.
Mm-hmm.
On Linux, you forgot my favorite, Yast. Don't make me ever use Yast.
Oh.
That's on I forget the distribution, but yeah. The one that used to be Novell. Anyway, so yeah.
So
there's a lot of them out there.
They are, and it kind of highlights how I think, when we're first learning software, and I first learned Ruby or any language, I started, off by writing everything within one program, or writing everything within a package that I controlled. But I think going over all these package managers, it shows how much software, whether it's Ruby or beyond, how much we tend to need to bring in things that other people have written.
Let's take a break from this episode and really quickly talk about finding a job. Searching for a job can feel stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and the job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. And sometimes you go all the way through an interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary offer or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Well, there's a solution. Hired.com is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities. They make the job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of how and when you connect with compelling opportunities. And after completing one simple application, top employers apply to you. And the best part is that you get money. That's right. They pay you if you get a job through them. Listeners to this show can earn double their normal hiring bonus by signing up with the show's link. That's right. You get $2,000 instead of $1,000. So go sign up at hired.com/RubyRoguesPodcast.
One thing that I'm wondering about, because we talked about all these different systems, Chocolatey on Windows and Homebrew and Mac ports on the Mac, and then you've got the Debian and RPM packages on Linux, which are definitely kind of the most common places where we're going to be installing things for our programs to be able to consume. But even then, I mean, there are some differences between Mac and Linux, and there are marked differences between Windows and Mac, or Windows and Linux. And so if I don't have the right DLL installed, it won't work on Windows, but it may work on Mac because it just kind of ships with whatever it was that I needed. And so even
Exactly.
then, oh man, right?
Right. We live in for better or for worse, a multi operating system world and multi platform world. And one of the challenges I've found is creating packages for operating systems that are different than the workstation that I'm working on. And the main way I do that, whether it's a Ruby program or Rails application or something else, is I'll often create a virtual machine with the operating system that I want to create a package for and compile it on that virtual machine and then release it on some sort of artifact repository. But even then, it's still very challenging to make packages that'll run both on Unix-based systems like Linux and Mac and on Windows.
Yeah, it's really interesting to harken over to the JavaScript world for a minute. Electron can run on any of those operating systems, at least the computer, laptop, desktop operating systems. And yeah, you wind up building like 3 different ways. It's very similar with NativeScript or React Native for mobile. But the thing that's really interesting is that for a long time, and I don't know if they've fixed all of the issues, some of these were kind of hand-wavy. It was like, yeah, it works on Windows, but, the process wasn't fully baked. And you see that a lot of times with people working in environments that aren't the same as their native system, like you pointed out.
Right. I used to be a TA for a Ruby class at the University of Washington. And one of the many things that were frustrating is we had many students who had a Windows-based laptop. Students brought their own laptop. And we had to do so much vetting of the gems that we recommended for projects to make sure that they would work for someone in a Windows environment, because it wasn't quite simple enough. I mean, we thought about giving everyone a virtual machine so everyone would be using the same environment, but then not everyone had the same background in Linux, and it was definitely challenging. I mean, the Rails installer for Windows has come a long way since then, and is becoming, I think, better to use bit by bit. But yeah, it is challenging, and it's something we need to keep in mind, I think, as engineers, is that people have these different environments, and they all need to run the same software much of the time.
So going into that for a minute, do we have the responsibility? Say I write a library in Ruby, and I'm thinking, okay, I'll ship it off using Ruby gems. Do I have the responsibility to make sure that it works on the other environments? Or as long as it works for me, am I fine just accepting open source contributions from people who want to use it on those other systems?
That is a good question. And that is a good question, and definitely gets into open source ethics and governance. I would say it depends on the scope of the gem that it is you're putting together. I mean, if it's a major one that we think is going to be used, across the Ruby ecosystem, I would say, yes, you do have the responsibility to at least, I'd say you have the responsibility to define in your README or elsewhere exactly what operating systems it works on and exactly what ones a user should be using to use it. And then I think you can get into accepting pull requests if someone wants to use it on a different environment.
I was just about to say that, to piggyback to what Chuck just said, I think it'd be better to have the opportunity to have the open source community actually press on.
True.
One of my questions I was going to ask you was, do you see Ruby packaging and the Ruby gem community becoming or getting back into the glory of the early days from 2007, 2010, where we were just as exciting and fun as the JavaScript NPM community? As one of the things that I'm seeing in the industry is that we are losing some of the enthusiastic, bright-eyed beginners from Ruby to JavaScript just because that level of energy, and maybe focusing on more open source when it comes to Ruby packaging might actually help ignite some of the fire in the Ruby community again.
That's a very good point, and I think, thinking back to when I was a newer developers who I've mentored, there's there's no greater thrill, I think, than opening a pull request to an open source project and having it merged in. I mean, it makes your work all of a sudden seem real.
Yeah, makes you feel like you're doing finally.
So I'm going to push us along to kind of the next topic, and this is something that you mentioned, Nell. And yeah, you started talking about checksums, and I'm like, oh, I never do this. Right? How do I know that the package is coming from the person I think it's coming from? Or in other words, how do I know that it's safe to put on my machine? Right.
With Ruby gems, you can sign them, which means I sign it with my public SSH key or PGP or whatever it is that you're using. And then I distribute that public key somehow to a person who's going to be using my gem, and they can verify that the key that was used to sign the gem is the same as the key they got from me. The problem is not a lot of people do that. And it's understandable. I mean, it is a highly manual process. I work on Supermarket at Chef, that's our product where people can share chef cookbooks or chef tools, and they share them as tarballs, as artifacts. And we've had many people tell us, what's the liability? If someone uploads malicious code, what if I download that and use it? And the same can be said for Ruby gems. What if someone uploads malicious code and I download and use it? So right now what I tell people is anytime you're pulling in external code into your own code, and this is easier said than done, I feel you have a responsibility to take a look at it and make sure that it's not going to do, sudo rm rf tilde and brick your machine.
Yeah, that was always the joke when I worked in ops was, I'll just make a package that does effectively that, sudo rm -rf / and away everything goes.
Right. So the best solution we have right now, and it's an imperfect solution, is signing it and then verifying the checksum or verifying the key. But there are definitely weaknesses in that system. So I'm really interested to see where that goes from here.
I'm curious, what is the weakness? I mean, I know that some checksums or certain hashing aren't 100% secure, but if you use a secure hashing algorithm, then aren't you pretty much safe?
You could be. The weakness, I would say, is in distributing your public key. How do I mean, I can personally give it to a developer, but if a developer is going to be, browsing Ruby gems and takes down my gem, I mean, I suppose I could give them a link to my website or something where it would have my public key up and they could verify it that way. But I guess what I see as the challenge is that key distribution part.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and even then, even if you have the key on your website, it's only down to the security of your website, so...
Exactly, yep.
It's WordPress and hasn't been updated in a while, and somebody really wants to get to those people.
Yep. There was a great presentation at Ancient City Ruby 2013 by Ben Smith called Hacking with Gems. And what he did was he demonstrated the various ways someone could put malicious code into a gem, and even I think had some videos set up with virtual machines showing what they do. However, it wasn't as much the technical weaknesses that he highlighted, though he did certainly show them. What he had done, and he did this at other Ruby conferences that year too, was he distributed these cards that said Ancient City Ruby official gem, go to this gem and download it. And then during his presentation, he put up a slide that had the GitHub names of everyone who had or Ruby gems names of everyone who had downloaded them, and highlighted how that kind of social engineering of getting people to download a package could also be used to crack security or to introduce a security hole.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. He got a round of applause, though I think in the video they removed that slide. Because, I mean, I go back and forth. I was like, I don't know about public shaming, but it was very effective on stage at the conference itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what do? Do you look at the code then, or is there any other way around it? I'm lazy. I don't want to look at the code.
I know, and that's and the answer is there's no easy way right now. And I'd love to see there be an easier way in the future, but right now it's how much do you trust the source where you got the key? And you should also consider the source where you're getting the software. I mean, theoretically, someone could upload malicious code to, say, the official Ubuntu repositories. However, those, I believe, are pretty well vetted. So I feel safer, if not 100% safe, getting something from an official source like that rather than downloading it off of downloads.com or something to that effect.
Gotcha. So what's the process that you go through then to create a package? Let's say you need an RPM or a Debian package. I can't imagine it's that hard, but what all's involved?
Right. Well, what's nice is there's a lot of tools available to help you create them. Like, let's say I want to create a Debian package. What I would do is, if I'm doing it manually, is I would create an Ubuntu VM, then install some of their built-in tools like Build Essential. And I would use those to take, let's say, a shell script and turn that into an executable package. And what those tools will do is they'll give me a Debian directory and then some files to edit to define exactly what I want that package to do and how I want it to be installed.
That makes sense. Are most packaging systems similar? I know that RubyGems kind of has that with the Gem spec.
RubyGems does, RPM does. I'm not as familiar with Homebrew and Chocolatey, but I believe they're similar. A cool thing that came out of, I keep mentioning my employer, but that came out of Chef recently is our product called Habitat. And what's cool about Habitat is the vision for it, and this is still being developed, but the vision for it is to be able to take a program and use Habitat to create a package that can run on any operating system. So you can say, I want a package that's going to run on Debian. It would create, or an Ubuntu operating system, it would create a Deb package for you. I want to run on Red Hat Linux, it would create a Yum package for you. And eventually, this functionality isn't there yet, but we'd like to be able to say, all right, I've created this package this program on a Linux workstation. I want this to be able to run on Windows. And what the promise of Habitat is that it'll have that functionality built in, so you can create software anywhere, then define where you want that software to run, and it'll automatically create that package for you. Right now it works for Linux flavors. The Windows functionality is still coming, but I think that kind of platform agnosticism is where we're going to see a shift in packaging in the coming years.
I think that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yep. And what's also cool about Habitat is what I think is the game changer in it is it includes all a shell script which defines how you want to install that package, whether it's on a container, whether it's on a VM, whether it's on bare metal. And if you install that package in multiple places, you can set it up so that they self-organize. So let's say we've got 4 containers, one's the leader, we've got 3 followers, say we have MySQL or something like that. If one of them goes down, it will automatically reorganize itself into that leader-follower pattern. Which is pretty neat. So I think it's adding some intelligence being packaged in with packages along with the software.
So one other thing that I'm wondering about here, because I like to run my code through continuous integration and
right,
just check up on stuff. And one of the things that I've seen done with RubyGems and also with like iOS libraries and things like that is that they actually package them up and deliver them after they're done. Is there a good way to do that through some of these systems so that it essentially puts a .deb or a .rpm or something else out there where people can get at it?
I use Jenkins. So I have that set up as my continuous delivery system. And what that will do is it'll create an RPM, it'll create a deb, and it will automatically put those on an Artifactory repository, and then they're available for people to download from there. And I'd say that is the dream. This is the first time I've had that workflow set up, but that's the dream of continuous delivery. Hitting one button, having it run all the tests, and then package the software together and deliver it to some sort of repository where people can download it and use it.
Would you recommend that people put those finished artifact files like up on GitHub so people could just download them and manually install them? Or are you better off putting them into a repository?
I'd say it's easier if you want to do it manually. Putting it up on GitHub is fine. I'd say if you want to make it so people can, automatically download the latest version of it or download the Edge versions of it, I will put that up in an artifact repository somewhere.
Now, one other question that I have for you, and this is kind of a personal preference thing I guess, is I hate some of the package conventions that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to remember which one's which, but on Debian, I think it's -dev, and on Red Hat it's -devil, and
right.
some of these others, it's different everywhere. So should you follow the convention everywhere? Or should you follow the convention for whatever system you're putting it in? So if I'm putting it into Red Hat, then I follow their convention. If I'm putting it into Ubuntu, I follow their convention and name it something a little different every time?
That's a good question. My personal preference would be go with the convention. If there is a convention, go with the convention of whatever system you're doing it. I know with Ruby Gems, we have some naming conventions, such as using underscores for multiple words, using dashes for extensions, not using uppercase letters. So I figure, it's kind of like, if I'm coming to a system, say to Red Hat or to Ubuntu, it's kind of like coming into someone's house. And for me personally, I feel like I should follow the conventions of that house and follow their conventions for extensions or for naming, rather than trying to bring my own to them. So I'd say at this point that would be my opinion.
It's like taking off your shoes if that's what they do when you come in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
And then as far as naming the packages, some people like to have clever names for their Ruby gems. And so you would never know what Nokogiri does or anything.
Right.
And then other people, they just name it what it does, right? It's yet another something or other. Do you think that one, it really matters more than the other? I know once they get adoption, everybody kind of knows what it is, but until then...
Right. I'd say, for me, again, this is personal preference. I prefer it indicating what it does. There's lots of cute names out there. You can do, maybe in a VM, do gem install beer and gem install bacon and see, it's kind of a game seeing what gems there are with those names. But I know as a developer, I kind of prefer seeing a gem name or seeing a package name and having an idea of what it does. It doesn't need to be an extensive description. In fact, in most packaging systems, there's a file where you put in the description of exactly what it does. But I personally like having just a little bit of indication. What am I getting here?
What are your thoughts?
What's the intent?
Hey, do you need a sanity check on your code? Make sure all the tests are passing. Make sure all the static assets compile. All the normal things that you need to do to make sure that your application is ready for production. Then you need continuous integration, and I recommend Snap CI. Snap CI is a product put together by our friends at ThoughtWorks, and it works great to pull all of your information together about your application, make sure it's ready for production, let your team know if it fails, and overall, just make your life easier. So go check them out at snapci.com.
I'm curious, Jerome, what do you think about that as far as naming gems or libraries?
Oh, well, for that, I was actually taking notes on everything she was saying so I can bring back to my troops. But when it comes to naming, we follow the idea of making it as simple as possible in one practice, doing only one way of naming it. Whatever Ruby says is the best way to do it, which is usually using underscores, things of that nature, and making it something easy to recognize for, I guess, your people or for people that are looking for your package. That's how we do it.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes you have to come up with something a little bit different because the name's already taken. But
yes.
Even then,
this is very true.
Naming it, if it's an XML library, naming it something that has XML in the name, even if it's not XML.
Okay, how about this? Let's talk about horrible experience of naming.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, there's a Ruby package out there called Comfortable Mexican Sofa. And when I first ran into it, I was like, "Well, this looks a little sketcy. I don't want to be the guy that pulls something in and the next developer sees it and thinks I'm like a jerk or something because I'm the jerk of the year or something." But they called it that because I'm assuming that there is another gem out there that's already taken CMS or customer management system.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Really one of the most popular CMS gyms out there. But the name is just horrible. As in, I was explaining the product to one of the owners, one of the buyers, who was Mexican Canadian, and when I was talking about use how the process of building the product out, and I said the gym's name, he was like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? Comfortable Mexican sofa?" He was shocked. He was like, "Whoa, pause, sir. I am only talking about this gym. See, it's right there. I'm not being a jackass, I promise." And I was like, this is why naming is so important, because just one, he was a Canadian business owner who was buying this app from our company, and he saw this gym and he thought that we were being like, someone in the app or in the product line was being a jerk during the design and creation of it. And I was like, no, that's not the case at all. And then I also learned my next important lesson is never get too technical with the person who's buying the app if they don't have a technical background, because it's just easier for them not to know everything. But that was a great example of when naming goes wrong on packages and gyms.
Well, and there have been others that have been in poor taste. I think the raciest one that I will actually, because some of them I don't even feel comfortable saying on the podcast, but I think the raciest one that I saw that I will repeat on the podcast, and you can immediately tell why you wouldn't want to name your gem this, was called Texticle.
Yeah.
That's just in poor taste. So.
Oh man, sounds like a gym created by a Marine. Like those are the only people that have that sick of a sense of humor to go that far.
Yeah, but there are all kinds of people, and it's going to bother people. So, it was a text wrangling gem, I think. But yeah, so it kind of said what it did, but it was not in good taste.
Right. I saw a tweet years ago that said when you're naming a package or naming a library or something, run it through Urban Dictionary first, just to make sure it doesn't have some meaning that you didn't intend.
Yep. That is a good advice. I'm going to write that down.
Right. So I feel we can almost move from naming to versioning, which is another massively important part of packaging, I think. Mm-hmm. And I tend to go the semantic versioning just because it seems, there's that XKCD comic that says, there's 14 competing standards, so we'll make one standard to rule them all, and then there's 15 competing standards. But it seems semantic versioning is the closest thing I found to a convention, or at least a little bit of consensus in how to indicate with your version whether someone should indicate with the version the risk of upgrading that package.
I agree. I know that NPM actually enforces semantic versioning.
Mm-hmm.
Ruby Gems doesn't, but again, I agree. It's easily understood that if the major version changes, then you're probably going to have a compatibility issue if you're reliant on the previous version.
Right. And then when I'm adding new features, I'll increment the version. If it's 2.8.1, I might do 2.9 point whatever. And then if I'm adding in a bug fix or a very minor one, then I'll just use the last digit to just indicate there's a change, but it's not a high risk change. There shouldn't be a lot of risk to upgrading it on your staging or production hardware.
Oh, so you kind of go with that model of like how Slack or how some other apps are using the idea of every time they make a change, they name it and they announce it and they let you know what happened, regardless of but basically how it doesn't matter how small or large that change is, but announcing and basically creating a social aspect of your changes.
Exactly. And I mean that's it makes it more helpful, I think, when something goes wrong, into zeroing in on exactly where something went wrong. Like I always, no matter how small the change is, I always update the change log to make it easy, not only if someone sees the error, to make it probably easier for them to kind of trace it and see where it came in. And that's helpful for me as the developer, because that means I can solve the problem much faster. But also just to have that, I mean, no software is going to have no errors all the time. It's kind of like that saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, all the people. Now I'm getting confused. But anyway, you see my point. And having that social aspect of it, it really connects the user of the software, I think, with the developer of the software. And we work together to make a better product or a better package or whatever have you.
Yeah, I agree.
That's very funny you say that. I see people that, one of the most fun things that I've done in my career is just go through and read like people's change logs. And some people, they create whole stories of like the process of going through their change logs. I know one company that they did an update of an app, and they basically wrote it out as if you were going to Mordor or like Lord of the Rings or something. It was just hilarious.
Oh, that's adorable.
That's awesome.
I'll share that with our troops, and I'm like, if you ever go to some of like the more like popular apps and App Store, and just read their change logs. You'll find some of the funniest stuff that you've ever like. If there was a tech comedian out there, all his material had been written for him.
Oh, that's adorable. It's something else that having that versioning and having that change log in there is when you're dealing with an error in a dependency of a package, or sometimes a dependency of a dependency of a dependency of a package. I had an intern start with me last year, and I was trying to fix something along those lines, a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. And I said in my stand-up, well, I'm going on this epic yak shave, and then learned later that she didn't know what yak shave meant. But it is the classic example of yak shave where there's some dependency, 3 or 4 layers down the line that's not right. Something has gone wrong, and you're seeing that cascade up the chain.
Yeah, those are always fun to track down too.
Right, it turtles all the way down.
Like, well, it's not my code. Well, it's not the code my code's using.
Exactly. Well, something I do like to see is when in an open source project, when someone reports an error and it turns out it's due to a dependency of that project. One of the things I like seeing open source maintainers, and something I try to do, is that if it turns out the error is not with my project, but it's with an or downstream project or a dependency, I like to open the issue myself and then link it to the issue in my project. Rather than closing the issue and telling the person, well, the problem isn't with our code, so we're just going to close this. If the problem's here, maybe you can open an issue in this other person's repository. As an open source maintainer, I'd like to take that responsibility myself, in that if there's an issue with a dependency of my software, either remove that dependency from my software or take the initiative to open that issue in that dependency's GitHub repo and say, hey, there's a problem here. This is where it was reported to me. What can we do together to fix this?
I like that approach. The other thing is then you can also just let people know, instead of, well, it's their fault, you can say, we're
exactly. Right, a collaborative approach. It works so much better than an adversarial approach.
It usually is my fault, though.
Right.
Anyway, the last thing that you have in the notes that you put in our Google Doc to prep for this was about software licenses.
Right.
I generally just go with MIT license on most of my Ruby stuff. But there are other licenses. Why would you pick one over the other?
That's a good question. MIT, I often go with for my personal stuff, just because it's one of the simplest out there. I don't know. Now I'm trying to remember. For stuff that I do as part of a company, I tend to go with Apache, partly because that's recommended by our legal counsel. And I think, though I'll need to verify with that, with Apache, there's some more release of liability or something. But I will need to check with those to verify it.
Yeah, there are a whole bunch, and some projects have actually created their own, like Postgres is
right.
Under the Postgres license. I think they have their own license. There are a few of them out there that do that. But essentially the license, so just to back up for people who don't understand why you put a license on software, because software is a creative work, it is copyrightable, at least in the US. And so as soon as you create it, you own it. And even if you put it out there publicly so people can see the code, they can't actually use it without violating your copyright. And so the software license allows them to use it and sets the terms under which they can do that. And so you'll see some people talk about GPL license. and they'll talk about the trade-offs with that. And then they'll talk about some of these other ones like Apache or MIT or, there are a whole bunch of them out there. And so
that was my question. I was like, what all licenses are out there? Because outside of MIT, I was under the impression that most companies just, went through their lawyer to license and make their stuff proprietary.
Yeah, it depends. So, for example, there's a system out there by a company here in Utah called Canvas by Instructure, and their open source version is GPL licensed. And so what that means is that if you modify GPL licensed, WordPress, incidentally, is also GPL licensed. So if you modify it or write code for it, then your code also has to be GPL licensed. In other words, it has to be open source and publicly available. Apache license is less restrictive as far as forcing you to share what your contributions, and it has a whole bunch of legal protections that go both ways. MIT license is basically do whatever you want with this, but we offer no warranty and make no guarantees about it. And those are kind of the most common ones that I see, but you'll see other ones come up. There's also the Affero GPL, which is generally used on more of the web stuff or open systems kind of stuff, and because it has just slightly different terms to it. But there are a few reasons why you would use them. MIT, if you're just putting it out there and you want people to use it, just put an MIT.
Exactly.
If you're working for a company, then talk to legal counsel, see what they want you to do. I've seen companies use MIT or Apache. And then the reason that Instructure uses the GPL or AGPL, I don't remember which one it is, for Canvas is because they actually sell a commercial version of Canvas that has a few more features in it. And so it makes it harder for people to profit by their work. But at the same time, people can go set up their own Canvas and not pay them anything. So it kind of cuts both ways for them. And there are other reasons why they went along with, open sourcing their commercial product that I probably don't understand all the reasons for. But so that's generally where you see these things. And then different companies will also have policies regarding what kinds of packages they can accept based on licenses. So some companies won't accept anything that's open source at all, and some companies will only accept them if they have an Apache license or a number of similar licenses. And then other companies are like, well, if it works and it doesn't cause us a problem, then we trust our developers. So it just kind of goes all the way. There are also a lot of companies that won't use GPL licenses because they don't want to open source their contributions to the project that they're building, and so they would rather actually do the work of recreating whatever it is that has the GPL license on it.
Yep, licensing is something that's been around for a while. So there are. I mean, there's I'd say MIT, Apache, and GPL are probably the most common that I see, and those. They're the most common for a reason, and it's because they limit that liability and they set at least a little bit of guidelines on how someone can use the work. And it makes sense if you're an open source developer, you might want your work to only be used in other open source software rather than wanting it to be used or rather than being used in closed source.
Yeah. One other thing that's kind of related to this that I think I'll bring up just for a minute, and that is if you want to contribute to one of these projects, a lot of times you have some kind of intellectual property agreement with your employer. Mm-hmm. And so anything that you create along those lines, they technically own. And so what winds up happening is with a lot of these, especially with the Apache Foundation, I interviewed a whole bunch of people with the Apache Foundation about 7 or 8 years ago. And what they do is they have to get individual contributor license agreements from the companies that their contributors work for, that exempt any work done on those packages or on those projects for the Apache Foundation, so that the Apache Foundation can then own the software instead of the individual or the company that they work for.
All right.
So yeah, lots of stuff there. We should get an attorney on to talk about all that stuff because it's really interesting.
Wow.
I have someone to recommend if you're interested in that.
All right, I will send you an email.
Cool.
Is there anything else we should talk about with packaging? I know we kind of delved off into open source and stuff, but any other areas that we should hit before we go to picks?
Right. I'd think we've given a pretty good overview. I mean, you can go way down the weeds on any packaging system, but essentially, packaging software is a way to manage the dependencies, both of your software and of software that you're using from other people, to simplify uploading it or to simplify downloading it, upgrading, etc. And there's many, many different facets to it.
Yeah. Oh, I do have one more question for you, and I'm curious how you answer that. So I know some of the people listening are going to go, well, I'm just a web developer, and we have people that do this stuff for us. Why should I care?
That is a good question, and I'd say part of it is, why should I care? Part of it is empathy. There are things that you can do with your software that make it more difficult to package than other things. And I think having that basic knowledge at least of what it takes to package software, even if it's not part of your day-to-day job, even if someone else does it for you, gives you a little more empathy for that person's job and helps build a better product all around.
I agree. I also feel like people should occasionally step outside of the narrow confines of whatever role you're in. You add more value to the company that you're working for, and you can do a whole lot more good for them just by doing this. I also agree with you on the point of empathy, but I think they both play in. If you understand how this thing gets deployed, how it all works, how everything hangs together, then you can make some very meaningful contributions to your company that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do.
Exactly. And maybe even you'll come across something in your work that could be very useful to software developers around the world. Knowing how to package it and how to release it is a way to contribute to that, whether it's JavaScript or Ruby, whatever it is, it's a way to contribute to that larger framework, to kind of get out of your own day job, your own personal work, and contribute to the world as a whole.
All right. Well, if people want to read more about this or follow up with you and what you're working on these days, Nell, what do they do?
Best thing is to go to my Twitter. It's twitter.com/Nell Shamrell. That's spelled NELLSHAM as in Mary RELL. Send me a tweet or DM or whatever you prefer, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And if I don't know the answer, I can probably point you toward resources or point you towards someone who knows the answer. And if you have opinions on this, I'm always interested in hearing those as well.
Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about Freelance Remote Conf. I'm putting on a conference for people who want to go freelance or who are freelance, and bringing in some of the experts from the Freelancer Show to talk to you about how to find clients, how to collect money, how to build your business, how to specialize, and much, much more. So if you're thinking about going freelance or you're already freelance and want to hear from the experts on how to go, become, or grow your freelancing business, then by all means, come check us out at freelanceremoteconf.com.
All right, cool. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Jerome, do you have some picks for us?
Yes, sir. My top pick for today is actually a Git repo called Google University. This guy, John Washam, he was former Army, and actually, funny story, he served in South Korea some time ago. Been a programmer for 15 years. Decided he was going to go on the journey to shore up his skills from web developer to full software engineer. So he's been documenting it in a blog and on his Git repo calling it Google University. And I absolutely love it. We've actually been using it as part of our curriculum for helping our veterans get better for interview prep over the past, I think it was shared with us about 4 or 5 months ago. Well, now it's become like huge as of last week. It's very funny. It was our best kept secret, and now everyone's talking about it. And it's really, really cool. So that's my top pick today. Messed me up.
Oh, sorry. We can cut that out. Go ahead.
University. I was like, what? I saw Rogue One, and I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah, but that's my top pick. Repo called Google University by John Washam. He's actually in Seattle. So
Awesome.
Yeah, if you want to reach out to him, he's definitely there. I just connected with him on LinkedIn. He's a pretty chill guy.
Cool. I will definitely check him out.
All right, I'm going to jump in with a couple of picks. On Saturday, I went and saw Rogue One. This is a new Star Wars movie. It's kind of funny because I keep going to these, and I'm hoping to feel the same way I feel when I watch one of the original three, not the prequels, the original three Star Wars. And I just don't. And I think part of it's just that I have this nostalgia about it that I don't think will ever be there for these others. So, it was a good movie. I really liked it. But yeah, it's not Luke Skywalker. Sorry. One thing that I thought it was funny, somebody sent me, his name's Jim Tobin. He's a listener of Adventures in Angular. And we harass one of the co-hosts on that show mercilessly about Star Wars. Because he hates it and he reacts to it. But anyway, so there was a company out there called OVO Energy that put together a blog post that talks about the cost of powering the Death Star. And I think it was like 6.8 octillion pounds, because they're a British company, so it's British pounds, which I have no idea how much that is in dollars, but that's still a lot of dollars. So anyway, I was like, oh wow, cool. And so I thought I'd pick that as well, because it was kind of mind-boggling just to see, how much it would cost to run the Death Star. So yeah, those are my picks. Nell, what are your picks?
All right, for mine, I am also picking Rogue One, though the reason I'm picking it, I think one of the reasons I liked it so much, is it highlights that wars are won and movements are won not as much by the people who become legends like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, etc., but normal people whose names may not be remembered, but the ones who, every day with every action try to do the next right thing. And I found that to be very moving. Next pick is Trader Joe's Irish Breakfast Tea. I'm a bad Seattleite in that I generally prefer tea to coffee. And the nice thing about this tea is it's got a good amount of caffeine in it. It's a nice pick-me-up, but without the crash I get from coffee or energy drinks. And then my final pick, it's kind of an unusual one, but it's the Scrub Daddy Sponge. And if you watch Shark Tank, you might have seen Scrub Daddy on it. And what's cool about it is it's a sponge that when you run it under warm water, it's soft. But when you run it under cold water, it's really firm and great for scrubbing. And, I hate doing the dishes. I always have, but it's a necessity of life. And I think it's a great example of a product that took something that had been around however long sponges have been around, and improved it and made it a little intellectually interesting at the same time with the way it changes texture. So those are my picks.
I thought you just liked having a smiley face in the kitchen.
I do love that it has
care.
a smiley face. Admittedly, that is part of the appeal too. It makes me feel better. And the smile is great for scrubbing spoons. You just stick it in the smile. Yep, exactly. And it works great. And the eyes are good for chopsticks. So
utility and delight. I love it.
Exactly. It's the perfect example.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for coming, Nell.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be back here, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. We'll catch everyone next week.
All right. Bye, everyone.